without further ado, I would suggest that we get started. Let's get into today's topic, which is getting started with Spatial Studio on the Oracle Cloud free tier. And I'm happy to have my colleague from product management, David Lapp, doing the hard work today, presenting today. David, I suggest you just introduce yourself, and then the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Hans. I just want to do a quick mic check. You hear me okay?
Yep, wonderful.
Okay, yep. Thanks a lot, Hans. And I am David Lapp. I'm a colleague of Hans, also on the product management team, and based in Massachusetts, and focus on how our spatial technologies work in the cloud with other Oracle platform technologies, and work with lots of customers and partners. And I suspect some of the folks on the line now I've worked with. So, welcome, and to all the people I haven't met yet, look forward to hopefully connecting with you as well. So this session is, as the title clearly describes, this is all about how to get Spatial Studio up and running and get started with it on the Oracle Cloud free tier. It's not a beginning to end sort of, what is Spatial Studio, and sort of a whole exhaustive review of that, because that's really other sessions and resources we have. This is really specifically to how to get going on the Oracle Cloud free tier. However, saying that, I realize that there will be maybe some people that aren't familiar with the moving parts involved here with Spatial and Studio. So I'm going to take just about 3 or 4 minutes only, just to kind of orient folks as needed. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Oracle Database, and for decades, Oracle Database has had native spatial capabilities. And recently, very recently, all those capabilities, all of them have been made just free features of the Oracle Database. So as this picture describes, that means that the native data types and APIs we have in the database support storing all kinds of geometries, points, lines, polygons, the sort of the intuitive types that you'd expect with geometries, as well as a bunch of advanced types for things like geofencing and routing through networks and geocoding addresses and imagery and so on and so forth. All sorts of geospatial data can be managed, processed, analyzed in the Oracle Database. That's the sort of the platform database part of the spatial features of Oracle Database. The other important part of the spatial features of Oracle Database are a series of what we're calling in this slide deployable components, and that's the general category of basically apps that come along with the Oracle Database, because Spatial comes along with the database. This is part of Spatial, and it's a series of apps that you can deploy, deployable components that do sort of a bunch of the useful things that you'd routinely want to do with spatial data. So those include things like our mapping server and mapping web client, JavaScript library, mid-tier geocoding engine, so on and so forth. So a bunch of mid-tier components to do the sort of useful operations that you do when building an application. Over on the far right, you see the item that says Studio. And that is where Spatial Studio fits into the sort of the picture of the spatial features of Oracle Database and what we're going to be talking about today. So Spatial Studio is just one of, and the newest member of the family of deployable components that comes along with Oracle Spatial. And as you'll see today, the useful thing that it does is provide self-service access to the spatial features of the database. So again, for folks that aren't that familiar, if you sort of tear away a lot of all the jargon and everything and just think about it from the database perspective, Spatial just means we have native data types and the ability to run spatial queries with native functions, like what are all the assets within 10 miles of a hurricane path. With Oracle, that's just a plain old SQL query that happens to use a spatial function. The types, the indexes, everything involved is just built into the database. And in addition to those basic sorts of functions and operators, we have a huge array of packages and various SQL and PL SQL packages, APIs, that do all of the basic sorts of computations, spatial calculations, measurements, and a bunch of other sort of specialized advanced sorts of spatial APIs that handle lots of different scenarios. And this session today is not about getting into all that, but just for those that aren't that familiar, it's a very wide and very deep spatial platform. For those of you that do want to sort of get a quick jump start, kick the tires with some of the spatial basics before getting into any of this self-service visualization sort of stuff, just at the database level, we have a tutorial, really pretty self-explanatory sort of drag and drop tutorial in something called LiveSQL, which is this great resource for all kinds of database tutorials, sort of on demand. You just create an account for free, you get in, you run it on demand in a live database. And we have one for basic spatial queries. So this link will be available to everyone, and I encourage you to give that a try. So that is the sort of the 3-minute orientation to spatial. And I mentioned this new deployable component, Spatial Studio. What is the purpose of Spatial Studio? Very simple. It's to expand the use cases of spatial from the traditional access via coding of some sort, SQL, PL/SQL, Java, Python, the ways that people access spatial traditionally, and expand that to allow self-service use cases for people that either aren't familiar with the database, query languages and coding, want to do no coding whatsoever, and also self-service for people that do know that stuff but just want to accelerate the access to those spatial features without having to get into the technical details of both doing spatial analyses, visualizing results, so on and so forth. So as you'll see, that's what we've made really easy with Spatial Studio. The scope of Spatial Studio goes beyond just making it easy to run spatial queries and spatial operations. The scope of Spatial Studio goes from the ability to incorporate any data that you have, data locally or data that's in an Oracle database, where needed, prepare it for spatial operations by geocoding addresses and indexing coordinates if it's not already spatial data, and then visualize, analyze, share results, publish results, make them available to other people to view what you've done, push the results out for downstream analysis and other analytics tools. So there's more than just accessing spatial features. It's really the whole life cycle of operations in a simple form that we're after here. So I'm going to actually just show a very quick example of Spatial Studio before we go any further. And I'm going to actually open up this instance here. So for those of you that haven't seen Spatial Studio at all, this is Studio, and what you have in Studio. For anyone that's used Oracle Analytics Cloud, it's going to look somewhat familiar, maybe more than somewhat familiar, very familiar. And we've sort of aligned our user experience with Oracle Analytics Cloud and other Oracle Cloud applications. So it's going to be a familiar user experience. And we provide the ability to have done a bunch of work to run some spatial operations and do some analysis and make get some insights, save what we've done. We had the ability to make connections to various databases, and then point to, just access the data in those databases. And where necessary, if they happen to be something like addresses, and if they didn't already have geometries, we can prepare that data by geocoding right here. And then once that data is ready to use, we have a project canvas here where we can do work on that data, and then a couple of administrative pages. So, for
David,
example,
just so that you're aware, the slide you're showing, or the screen you're showing, is slightly truncated on the left.
Thank you. I forgot that I need to switch now to sharing my desktop. Is that better?
That is better.
Yeah, thank you, Hans. Sorry, everyone.
No worries, no problem.
That was a Zoom blunder on my part. Okay, so we have projects that we've saved, data we can access, and then when we want to work with some data, we could, for example, I was describing probably off this where you could see how I could geocode some data, and then I could say I'd like to now start to visualize and start to work with that data. So we've got this interactive canvas. I can drag and drop and then start to do all kinds of work with this data, add additional layers, start to run spatial analyses to find out what's nearby, what regions are things inside of, all kinds of spatial operations, transformations, calculations, and it's all available. And these are all those spatial APIs, the SQL APIs, PL SQL APIs that are in the database, but made available through simple, GUIs to point and click and give a name to your analysis, and you're, good to go. So that's sort of the lay of the land with Spatial Studio. And what this session is going to be about is how to get this Spatial Studio application and the supporting database up and running in the Oracle Cloud free tier. All right, so I am now going to stop sharing, and now I'm going to share again and go to that portion of the screen. All right, Hans, can you confirm I'm back to the correct portion of my slide?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so that's just a quick peek at Spatial Studio. Now, we want to talk about how to get Spatial Studio up on the Oracle Cloud free tier. I mean, that's one very succinct thing we want to do, but to do that, there's a few things that we need to understand. Number one, just what does it mean to set up Spatial Studio in general, cloud aside? Just in general terms, what does that mean? That's our first thing to discuss. And so I have right at the top here a Get Started link that talks about just that. How do you access, what are the options for accessing and deploying Spatial Studio in general? So that's sort of the first item. And you can see the information in the link, but just to summarize it, number one, setting up Spatial Studio involves understanding what the sort of the environment and technical requirements are for Spatial Studio. So Spatial Studio is going to require a database to access, to store its metadata, and to have spatial data to analyze, and that happens in a database. There are technical requirements for the Java, the version of Java, the amount of RAM that's available, and for a database user to be available for Studio to use for storing its own internal metadata. So that set of requirements, we're going to step through this, but that set of requirements is part of what's in that Getting Started link. Number two, there's more than one option for for the actual sort of the binaries and the actual deployment app itself. Option number one is that you can access Spatial Studio as a JEE EAR file that you deploy to WebLogic server. It can also be deployed to select other servers, but the central case is deploying it to WebLogic, and that's of course for a real a production environment or even a test and dev environment where you're going to have lots of data, a bunch of users, and you're going to really use this and flex its muscles. There's also a quick start, which is a lightweight self-contained bundle, which is meant for sort of testing, kicking the tires, and lighter workloads. And that's just simply a download, unzip it, and run it. And then finally, those deployment options for WebLogic for Quick Start are also available through the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, because the WebLogic and the Quick Start, they can be run on premises, in the cloud, wherever you want. They're just deployment files. But it can also be run in the cloud, and more importantly, through the Cloud Marketplace, which makes it really easy. And then the very first time you ever log in to a new instance of Spatial Studio, Studio is going to request information about that schema that you created, where its metadata is going to live, because the first time it logs in, it needs to know where its metadata schema is, so that it can populate it with its sort of bootstrap itself to get started. So that's the setting up, sort of the background on setting up Studio. So that again was not cloud specific. That was just in general. Now, after this first 10 minutes of my talking about it, now we're sort of in a position to talk about Spatial Studio on Oracle Cloud free tier. We talked a little bit about Spatial Studio, and what its deployment sort of mechanics are. And now we can move into the cloud part of the discussion. All right, so just like in order to talk about deploying Studio on the Oracle Cloud free tier, you need to kind of know that, at least that beginning piece of what it means to deploy Spatial Studio in general. I'd say the same thing about Oracle Cloud. So if we're going to talk about the Oracle Cloud free tier, deploying Studio, what that means, the first thing we have to do is clarify, what do we mean by free tier? What are the kinds of accounts that are available, and what do those accounts mean? So basically 2 types of Oracle Cloud accounts: paid accounts and free tier accounts. When you have a paid account, you have access to everything, all the infrastructure and platform services that are in the Oracle Cloud. You pay for them by using universal credits that you acquire either through a monthly subscription or through a pay-as-you-go form. And I have a link here that shows, points to all the details around that. So that's what you have if you've got a paid account. Free tier account, which is the subject of today, is the following. When you have a free tier account, you always and perpetually have access to free tier services, which are essentially autonomous database, compute, storage, and networking. So you've got basically a compute, basically like a computer on the cloud, a virtual computer on the cloud with storage and networking and access to autonomous database with quotas, a certain number, like 2 of each of those, as we'll see. There is a 30-day free trial at the beginning of when you set up an account, a 30-day free trial and $300 in those universal credits that you can use for anything you want. So that's great. You create a free tier account, you can actually create all kinds of resources that are not perpetually free, but you've got $300 to play with them for 30 days. When the 30 days expires, you either, if you have created any of those types of not always free services, but paid services that you used your trial credits for, after 30 days, you either have to upgrade to a paid account, or else those instances you created will terminate because you're no longer in a free trial and you only have access to the always free stuff. But the always free resources that you use, database, compute, storage, networking, that remains, like the name says, always free. And I've got a link at the bottom that provides access to, all the details behind what I just described. All right, that's step 1. What are the Oracle account types? Important topic number 2 in the Oracle Cloud is the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. When it comes to provisioning something like autonomous database, as you'll see in a couple minutes, super simple, like 2-step wizard, done. When it comes to deploying some application that's not a cloud service itself, but an application like Spatial Studio or any other application that's like a JEE deployment that you're going to put in a server and then connect to other services, that can be done if you understand enough about the Oracle Cloud and creating virtual cloud networks and getting things set up properly. And in fact, it's not rocket science by any means. And we have workflows for doing that, and it's doable, but it's a long series of steps. The Oracle Cloud Marketplace simplifies all that by having apps that are pre-bundled into basically a big set of instructions which you run, and those instructions are presented to you really as a wizard, where you are asked questions and you provide the answers, and the marketplace stack goes about the process of doing all the laying everything down and getting it wired together instead of you having to. And it's a tremendous. That marketplace was just recently opened up to free tier accounts, which is a big deal, because that means that what we're going to do is going to benefit from that in the next 15, 20 minutes. So Oracle Cloud Marketplace greatly simplifies this, and because it's available to free tier accounts, our life is going to be easier, and the next 15, 20 minutes is going to be simpler than it would have been before Marketplace was made available. I have a couple links in here, one of them just to the Marketplace itself, one of them to the doc that really describes the Marketplace in more detail. But as you'll see in a moment, there's nothing terribly complicated about using it. The hard work is done by the vendor, the provider of the app, whether it's Oracle or a partner, to put together this offering as a packaged stack that you can just deploy with a couple of clicks. In the marketplace, the apps on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace are either free apps or not free. And the 2 flavors of not free are either paid, meaning you are charged by the over the times, the amount of time that you use it, or they're priced in terms of you saying you're already licensed for this product, that you are going to use your license in the cloud. Those are the ways that the ways that marketplace apps are priced. Those three flavors. The actual app itself is provided on the marketplace in one of two forms. It's either provided as a stack, quote unquote stack, which is in technical terms a Terraform template, which basically means it's using the sort of the Terraform scripting language. It's a set of instructions that goes about, again, like provisioning the resources, laying down the binaries, unpacking and deploying and getting everything up and running and networked. Or it's basically like a virtual hard drive that's set up with everything in it already. And there's the wizard to deploy this. So that's in general terms, nothing studio specific here. That's the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. Spatial Studio is on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. And it's on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace in two flavors, both the WebLogic deployment, which is a bring your own license, because WebLogic itself is not free, even though Studio is free, and also the Quick Start kit, which is that lightweight Studio flavor, and it's free. We have both of those on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, and they work with any Oracle Cloud database. So whether that's autonomous database or a database cloud service, and it's not autonomous, they work with any cloud database. So we haven't, at this point, this is just generic Spatial Studio on Cloud Marketplace. We haven't said anything about free tier account. It's just, there's this thing called the Marketplace, Spatial Studio is on it, the bring your own license, and the free flavor. Now, to put these things together for Spatial Studio on the Oracle Cloud free tier, one of the always free resources in the Oracle Cloud is an always free autonomous database. One of the compute shapes that's one of the always, that's part of the Oracle Cloud free tier is an always free, very small compute shape. And one of the versions, or one of the Spatial Studio apps on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace is the free Spatial Studio Quick Start app. So what we see here is free, free, free. And that's kind of the point, is like putting these pieces together to come up with a sort of a combination, which is truly always free, free today, free going forward. And we'll get later on to sort of the suitable use cases for this. But by using the always free autonomous database, the always free compute shape, and the free marketplace app, you have a combination that will work in always free. Now I'll mention here right now that the Spatial Studio Quick Start itself is free. That's great, and you could run that also on big, very much larger paid compute shapes if you wanted to run that free app on a beefier server. By no means are these hardwired and coupled together. What I'm trying to portray here is the combination of resources that you can put together that are all always free for a free tier account. So now we're going to walk through all of this, and depending on how the time goes, I'll be able to do that'll sort of dictate how much of it I can actually do live on the fly versus something that's already baked, take it out of the oven, so to speak. But what we're going to do are the following steps, or at least show you them. And this is the whole list of what you do to get Oracle Spatial Studio up on the cloud free tier. We'll start by creating a database, and the little call out to the right is sort of what we use, or where we get the information for it. So we're going to create a database using the Create Autonomous Database wizard. We're going to configure the database user that Studio is going to need, which is described in the Studio documentation. We're going to deploy Spatial Studio from the Cloud Marketplace using the free Studio to the free, always free compute. Then, as the README describes in the Quick Start itself, we're going to, just for best practices perspective, we're going to update the default password that comes with Studio, because first thing you want to do is to put a password of your own in there. Following that, we're going to recognize the fact that this free compute shape is very, very small. And so we're going to sort of lower some of the default settings so that they can live within this small free compute shape. Once we've done that, we're going to bounce Studio, so all that takes effect. And the very first time we log in, we're going to tell Studio, here's where the repository schema is in this database, and then we'll kick the tires. So that's it's a few steps, and it's really what it's all about is specifically getting Studio on the free tier. And some of the stuff we're doing is just because it's the free tier. Specifically, that step number 5 is all about the fact that we're running this in a very, very small footprint. So let's get started with this. And I'm going to not make the mistake I made before when I forgot to change the sharing. So this time I'm going to share, and I'm going to share this whole screen. Hans, I'm going to ask if you would please give me a confirmation that this is shared okay.
Yep, that looks good.
All right, let me try to get this thing over here. Close this guy. Okay, so we're going to start by logging into the Oracle Cloud, sort of day one here. So I've got an always free account that I created, and so I'm just going to log in to my always free account. And the very first thing that we were going to do here is to, once it's, you're always going to get this information telling you, well, my free trial ended, so no more free trial credits. I'm in a, I can only use stuff that's always free. As soon as you connect, you're going to see always free eligible, always free eligible. Some things are part of always free, some things aren't. So what we need to start with is a database. So the very first thing that I'm going, and actually let me go to full screen here. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is come over here and go to, I could create an autonomous data warehouse or an autonomous transaction processing. Say I want to create autonomous data warehouse instance. Now, as you're going to see, I already have one in here. And in fact, I created it just for today, ADW for AskTOM. Even says right under it, always free. You have a quota of 2 free autonomous databases in your always free account. And it just so happens I actually also have a autonomous transaction processing free database. So I've got my quota filled with 2 of them already. But just to show you what you would do, this would be empty for you. You simply click create autonomous database. You give it whatever name you want for that database. It could either be a free ADW or ATP. You can only use shared infrastructure for a free account, so there's no choice there. And here, it's telling me I already have my 2 free ones. I can't create another one. If I want to create another one, I'd have to create a paid account. But you won't see that if you don't already have 2 of them. You'd use a 19C database, and you can't increase past this, one OCPU and 0.02 terabytes. That's what you're going to get. You'd supply your password. This will be your database password for the admin user, which is the highest level user that you get with a autonomous database account. And that's it. License included. You're not bringing any, you don't have to have a license that you're bringing. It just provides you a license, and you click create autonomous database. That's literally it. And it takes, I'm going to say maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and that's it. And you've got it. It's running. So that's I know, pretty anticlimactic, but that's a good thing. It's very, very straightforward to do that. So once we've done that, we now have our database. So when I click into it, I can take a quick look and see some stuff that's going to be important for me. The very first thing that I'm going to do is when I work with this database in Spatial Studio, and basically any client that's going to connect to an autonomous database, you connect using something called Oracle Cloud Wallet. So if I click on this DB connection button, that's what lets me download this wallet. And this wallet's just a zip file that has all the instance names, the IP address, the service names, all that stuff. And it makes it real easy to connect. So you're going to download that wallet, which is something I've already done, so that it'll be available for me in a few minutes when I want to connect to it with Spatial Studio. And then the next thing I want to do is to create the user that Spatial Studio is going to require. And that's in the Getting Started doc and in the documentation. And an easy way to do that is to use SQL Developer Web. So I just click Tools. I'm going to open SQL Developer Web. And I'm going to log in using admin. The user I just mentioned is created automatically, and the password that I supplied. And then now we're in SQL Developer Web. So what I would do next is something like this. And I'm just going to paste these guys in here. What I would do is something like this, and this is in the documentation as well. So I'm going to create a user, and this user could have any name. It's just going to be the name of the schema that Spatial Studio will use as its repository. And I'm just using the name Spatial Studio repo. You could use any name you want. It's just nice to use a name that's going to be easily identifiable, and just some silly password for the moment. So as the documentation describes, we create this user. We then assign a default table space and quota to that user, so that that user is allowed to create tables and views and things. Because when Spatial Studio connects as that user, it's going to seed the schema with its metadata data model. And it's going to do that automatically, but that user has to exist in order to do that. So I've created that schema already. So I'm not going to do it again, but that's literally, 1, 2, 3. Create the user, give it a default table space, assign it quota. So now that that's done, we now have our database and our cloud wallet that we need to connect to it, and we have the user, the schema created that Spatial Studio is going to need. Right? The next step is going to be to connect. The next step is going to be to deploy the Spatial Studio application. So to do that, I come down here to the marketplace. And I'm going to select applications. And when applications comes up, you could filter, for things, filter for stacks provided by Oracle, or you can come up here and say Spatial Studio. And there we have it. And like I mentioned, we have two apps for Studio. We have the Bring Your Own License, which is a full sort of enterprise level deployment to WebLogic, so that when you use this app, part of what you're deploying is a WebLogic server to whatever compute node you specify, and you're attesting to the fact that you are licensed for WebLogic, or the Quick Start, which is free. So, and the app itself is free. It's running in a Jetty, an open source, lightweight Jetty JE server. So it's all free software. And the only thing that you would potentially pay for is compute if you're running this on a big, heavy compute node with lots of memory and lots of OCPUs. So let's just say we want to do this with our Always Free account. So I'm going to pick that free one. And when we look at it, we can see that there's, it's a free app. We have an overview here with a bunch of links that will be very useful to you to just see how to, how to get started in general. And the usage instructions. And this is really important because it describes the steps for what to expect when you deploy this app through the marketplace, and a few sort of prerequisites and things that to be aware of. However, in the free tier, and with what we're going to be doing right now, I'm assuming that in the free tier, the account, the cloud account that's being used to deploy this app is like an administrator, meaning this is my own free tier account. I'm the administrator of my own free tier account. This is the work to deploy this is not being done by some other user that has a lower level of privileges that doesn't necessarily have the privileges to deploy all this stuff in this account. It's being done by me and you, the administrator of your own account. And I mention that because part of the instructions down here talks about, before creating a stack, perform these tasks, make sure your user has these policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a whole bunch of stuff that you would need to go in and do to basically tell the cloud that the user that's doing this has the privileges to be doing all these things. You don't need to worry about any of this as long as you're doing this in your own free tier account. So hopefully that's clear. But the reason that we've done this is because we can't necessarily always assume that's the case. And these are the same instructions when you're doing more of an enterprise deployment. It may be that the owner is sort of a whole corporate Oracle Cloud account, sort of administrator account, but there's other profiles of people in the cloud account doing this type of application deployment. So we need to make sure that we're clear about what you need, but this simplifies away in your own free tier account. So again, long way of saying, don't worry, you don't need to do this stuff in your own free tier account. So anyway, with that in mind, all we have to do here is acknowledge that we accept the terms and say launch stack. Now, launch stack is not, when I push that button, that's not sort of starting the deployment of Spatial Studio. What it's doing is launching the set of instructions that begins with this wizard. So the whole stack as a whole is a set of instructions that begins with prompting the user for a bunch of details about what they want to call the instance and passwords and so forth. And then when that's done, as you'll see, then we have something that we can say, okay, now go and build the Studio instance. So when we create our free tier Studio account here, we're just going to give it a name. We could call this whatever we want, give it a description. One thing I neglected to mention, but I should have mentioned, and it's certainly in all the documentation, is the fact that everything that you create, all the artifacts you create in your Oracle Cloud are created within a compartment. And I have a compartment here called Sandbox. It's the only one that I've created. And even when I did that autonomous database, I had done that in a compartment. So everything you're going to do is in a compartment and should not be done just in the default root compartment. Nothing to do with Spatial Studio per se. That's just a very generic Oracle Cloud sort of best practice and instruction. So there's nothing to change here. Terraform, we don't have to touch any of that. We don't have to apply any tags. We're just giving it a name at this point. And then when I say next, this could all be left, the resource name prefix, no reason to touch or change any of that. Here's the key step though. So when I say server instance shape, this is basically saying, what compute shape do I want to put this Spatial Studio free app on? It could be, if my account had access to big paid shapes, they would be listed here, but I'm in a free tier account. There's one shape available to me because I'm not in my trial anymore. I'm just nothing but always free resources show up. And it's this VM E2.1 micro, which basically means a very, very small, always free shape with 1 gig of RAM. And, it's really just meant, as I'll say over and over, for sort of lightweight testing and experimenting and having a sandbox. So I have one choice, the always free micro shape. The next thing I need to do, because of the fact that I'm going to want to SSH into that compute node to do some things like update the default password, I would copy and paste my SSH public key in here. And that allows me to SSH into this compute node, as I'm going to do in a couple of moments. Another very generic Oracle Cloud thing is I have to pick which availability domain this compute node is going to be in. And that's going to be one of the three, in my case, Ashburn domains. So I can pick that. I would have pasted my key in here. And then it's just going to now, I don't have to do anything else. I'm going to let this marketplace stack do all the networking stuff for me. If I was really knew all about this, or if I had some existing network resources that I wanted to use, I could check this box and then set stuff up myself. But I'm not even going to do that, because the whole point of this exercise right now is, if you don't really know all that stuff, you just want to let the marketplace stack do all that stuff for you. So that's all I'm going to do here. And then I'd say next, which is going to just give me, I believe, a summary. Let's see. If I can get this to move away. Hans, are you still hearing me okay?
Yep, all well on that end. Is the
Okay.
button hidden behind something
Yeah,
you've
it
got on?
might be. I think I've got a.
Oh, it requires the SSH key. That's the point.
Oh, it's got to. Okay, I'm sorry. All right. So let me just paste that in so you can see what comes next. All right. So I'm just going to grab my SSH key. Okay, right here. Open it. Control C. Put my key right here. All right. Thank you, Hans. I was about to scratch my head. So now that's basically it. You know, we have everything ready to go, and I really didn't have to do much of anything at all. And at this point, you would then just say create, and I've of course done this already, so I'm not going to say create. But once you say create, what it's going to create for you is a stack, and that stack is just a set of instructions that launches to do all the deployment for you. So once that's done, you can always go back and see these stacks you've created under Resource Manager Stacks. So I've done this already. I've done it a couple times, you know, with this other app, but here's the thing that we're doing today. I named my Spatial Studio instance, or I named this stack for today, Oracle Spatial Studio AskTOM. So if I click on it, this window we're looking at right here is what you would see. This is the window that you would see if I had said like apply when I went through the stack wizard instead of just canceling because I had already done it. This is what you would see, and it's already been done and succeeded. But when you do this, this will be like orange and we'll say processing or in process or something. And then you'll have a log down here that'll go on and on and on. And the longer that log is, the better you feel about how many things this this marketplace stack is doing for you that you don't have to do yourself. So it's taking care of all the stuff that you would normally, you know, have to do. But then when it's done, you know, eventually it says complete and gives you outputs about your instance. And I left the name, you know, default, and it tells me the public IP for the compute node that was the always free compute node that's created, and it gives me the URL for my Spatial Studio instance. This is awesome. So right now it would be up and running, and I could just copy. I could copy and paste that, and up goes Spatial Studio, and that's what you'd have. Now, I mentioned a couple of other things, and I still have 5 minutes, and then we 5 for Q&A. So the other things that we need to do. Number one, there's a default password that it's best practice to change. And so to do that, what we do is we SSH into this compute node. I entered my key so I can log in. Now I'm on my always free compute node. And if I CD to the folder that's created in the root, here, I'm now in the folder where I can sort of do the stuff that I need to do. So the first thing that I want to show is how there's a README file right in here that has the information that you need to do what I was going to do if I have time. And that's basically in this README file, Studio User Management. And the whole point right now is we want it even says right in here, all the passwords are default, you know, to this default password. It's strongly recommended that you change them. And then it tells you there's a command that you run right here to change the password. And so if you run this command, for example, for admin, what it returns to you is something that looks like this. And what you do is you like, you know, this is just exactly what's detailed in this README file. You then take this encrypted password and you paste it into the file that stores those passwords. So that ends up looking like this. So you see what's right here includes this thing right here. And that encrypted password is what comes out of running that command. So if you have, you have your admin password, you want to create your password all of your own, all you're going to do is run the command as it says in this README, grab this encryption thing here and update it in this file. And that's all in the README. The other important thing that I want to mention is because of the fact that we are running in the free tier, always free resource, there is an important thing that you need to do in order to avoid running out of available connections in the data in this free tier of the database. So I've just opened a file called, a file which is the configuration file for Spatial Studio. It's in the documentation, describes where it is and what it's called. And the one thing that I change in here is in this database section, here, there is a setting for the number of database connections that the Spatial Studio application is allowed to create. By default, those numbers are like 2 or 3 times larger. And that's like almost always fine. But with the small amount of resources that the Always Free account gives you, we recommend that those be reduced back down to 16 and 8 from, I think, 64 and 32 is their default. So what that means is that normally Studio would create lots and lots of connections and do things in parallel. So it's going to not do as much of that and be a little slower because we just don't have that number of connections available. And if you don't do that, you will end up seeing some like errors saying you've run out of available connections, and this is all you have to do. So that's step 1. And then the other step that we do, again, strictly because of the Oracle, the always free resource limitations, is there's also a memory setting for the JEE server, basically telling it how much memory it's allowed to consume. Normally, this is like over a gig, because normally you'd have more than that. I mean, you have way more than that in your phone. But in this very small, always free compute shape, we reduce the maximum memory for the app to something a little smaller than a gig so that there's enough room for the application and the OS to run. So that's basically it. And then once you've done those things, you would restart the Studio application, which is also in the documentation. It's basically running a stop command and a start command. So if we look at what's in this home directory, we'll see that there is a stop.sh command, a start.sh command. So you really just run those commands to stop and then restart Studio so that it picks up those changes, and that picks up the new the updated password, the memory configuration, the number of connection setting, all that stuff. So that's basically it. And once you do that, you have this running instance, and it should be, I think I said A, B, C, X, Y, 1, 2, 3. I think that's what I set it to, and that's wrong. And let's see what I have here. Good. A, X, Y, Z. Just the wrong instance. Sorry about this, folks. 1 second. AskTOM. Oh, okay. Sorry. At the last minute, I did one of those password changes and forgot that I'd done that. Okay. So I couldn't log in because I tested that password change thing that I just showed you. But this is what you get now. You've got an up and running environment, Spatial Studio, and we could now just start to do whatever kind of normal stuff we might want to do. So I might just come in here and say I want to start by grabbing a shapefile. This is the first thing I happen to see. So this is now just Spatial Studio in action, loading some data from the file system, give it a name, whatever. I don't have to do anything but say run. And then when it's done, it's going to tell me it's done. So this is Spatial Studio loading a shapefile off my local system. It's loading that into the Oracle database, populating spatial metadata, creating spatial index. It's doing that all in that free tier database. It's done. It's ready to go. I could say create project. I now have that in a project. I can drag and drop it into my map. And now I could start to do all kinds of fun things by saying spatial analysis, add more layers, and go nuts with this. So that's all on 100% always free resources. And to wrap here, it's portion, share, and we basically barely kicked the tires, but I kind of went through as much of it as I could in the time we had. And I'm not going to go through this. I want to just make this will be available to folks, but important considerations. Small amount of memory in that always free compute. So there's appropriate usage, put it that way. And one of the important things is the fact that Studio will tend to build up an in-memory cache in the application tier as you visualize and work with data sets. And so we're making recommendations about how to sort of keep from exhausting the memory in the always free tier. And I just reinforced the fact that this is really for having a sandbox and kick the tires and not something that you would expect to be for a production environment. And let me turn it over to Hans. Hans, if you want to wrap things up.
David, yes, thank you. That was brilliant. I mean, I always find it so amazing how much automation there is on the Oracle Cloud, and you just click a button, you get the whole stack, all of the magic with the setup of the network and the resources, and all of that just happens magically under the covers. Thanks for going through all of that. I hope that it was also useful for everybody else on the call. I'm pretty sure that has been an eye-opener for at least some. Now, just to wrap up, first thing, if you have any questions, if there was anything which was unclear, if you have any development-related issues which you would like to discuss, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. While you do that, while you're typing, here's a couple of places where you can find further information. Just because we've only shown the Spatial Studio so briefly, the one thing I can recommend here is to go to YouTube and look at what we have in the Oracle Spatial and Graph channel, because there's various demos which we've produced to show you how Spatial Studio works and how you do analytics. And there's a nice example, nice end-to-end example, or three in the meantime, which Rasmus Edwards has created, a colleague from Oracle Digital, showing how to use Spatial Studio in the context of network analytics. So that would be my recommendation here. We've talked about Live SQL. You hopefully know about the forum. If you want to join the community, there is the LinkedIn group where all the Spatial and Graph users kind of come together on LinkedIn. And if you want to interact with them, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have the TechCast days coming up. As part of that, we will offer an opportunity to also interact with participants during the virtual conference on Slack, so that we are kind of simulating coffee breaks and icebreaker sessions after the conference and the like on Slack. So you can reach out to the speakers, ask questions in private if you don't want to ask them in public. All of that is possible. I have posted the registration link for the TechCast days into the chat if you haven't seen them yet. If you found this useful, you're of course very welcome to tweet about it. Down at the bottom here, you can find a few Twitter handles which you may want to use for that purpose. And David, if you move to the next slide rather than your demo, the next slide, here's what we have coming up for you next month. Topic for next month's AskTOM Office Hours session on spatial and maps in the database will be spatial analysis to predict electrical outages, and that will be co-hosted by Rasmus Edwards, as I already referred to a little earlier. Good. Any more questions?
Hey, Hans.
David.
I saw there was one question about Cloud Wallet, and I talked about having downloaded it. We're going to need it, and it never came back, and I didn't show it, and I really just ran out of time to be able to show it. But I just wanted to quickly mention that that Cloud Wallet is just a file that you download, and then what I didn't show, but you'll see, is the very first time that you try to that you open Spatial Studio and log in. The first time, it's going to prompt you for a database connection, and one of the options will say Cloud Wallet, and you click on that, and that's where you browse to your Cloud Wallet and supply the database user and password. I just didn't show that, but that's when that would come up for you.
Great. Yes, and the same would apply to whatever other tools you use, like SQL Developer or something, if you have anything local. Good. Thanks for explaining that. And while you're at it, there's another question which you may also want to briefly expand on, which is about how to integrate Spatial Studio with Oracle Analytics Cloud.
So the quick answer to that right now is that we are reading data out of Oracle database in Spatial Studio. Oracle Analytics Cloud can also connect to and access and work with data straight out of the Oracle database. Therefore, when we do some sort of analysis in Spatial Studio, like calculate the distance between geocoded locations in some facility of interest, or if we figure out which region each item is in, sort of do an enrichment like that to create a geographic hierarchy based on spatial relationships. We're doing that and creating views in an Oracle database, which OAC can directly connect to. So the quick answer to that is we sort of meet in the database. That's answer number one. And answer number two is that in the general case, everything that we do in Spatial Studio, so the data sets that we have and the analyses that we can create, can be exported just using the menu, exported as both CSV files so that you can load them as a data set to OAC and OAS. And you can also download them as GeoJSON, meaning you can load them to OAS and OAC as a custom map layer. And that's where we're at right now with integration. And that integration between our tools is just going to continue to get sort of tighter and tighter.
Great. Okay. Thanks for the explanation, David. I think that was very helpful also. Yeah, I think we're already a little past the hour. Can you just move to the next slide? That should be nothing but the thank you slide. Hope to see you all next time. If you are not tired of online content on our spatial technologies, there will be a session on the Oracle Spatial Technologies as part of the Oracle Database at Home episode 2 tomorrow. So there's more good content to come on spatial analytics, and we have a member of the spatial user community, Nick Salem from Newstar, also co-presenting on that. So if you're interested, that's another opportunity to get in touch. Otherwise, I hope to see you all next time on the Ask Tom session. Until then, stay safe, and thank you for joining.